Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Laura Sibold. I'm a nationally certified speech-language pathologist, autism spectrum disorder clinical specialist, and certified youth mental health specialist. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started with our session. Right? And then start the presentation. There we go. Okay, so welcome today to the Roadmap to Regulation, helping children cope with big emotions. And I think I have maybe some parents, caregivers, family members here today, other stakeholders, so other professionals, educators. So thank you all for joining, and I'm very excited to be here with you today. Today's session is hosted by Florida Atlantic University, the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, frequently called CARD, and also PEPSA, Partnership for Effective Programs for Students with Autism. So the mission, FAU Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, CARD, provides expert counseling, training, and support at no charge for all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities, their families, employers, the professionals, and community and governmental agencies serving them. The vision for FAU CARD is that they provide support and assistance with the goal of optimizing the potential of all people across all race, ethnic, and gender groups with autism and related disabilities. So CARD serves in the 5 counties, Indian River, St. Lucie, Martin, Okeechobee, Palm Beach, in the offices of in 3 offices, Boca Raton, Jupiter, and Port St. Lucie. And they provide one dynamic service. So the phone number for CARD is 516-297-2055. Website, www.autism.fau.edu. And their email address, card@fau.edu. Services offered at no charge include family and school consultations, trainings and workshops, public education, referrals and resources, adult hangout groups, and much more. And again, you can see on the bottom here, the phone number, website, and email address. Okay. So a little bit about me. First of all, today I am having some allergy issues. So I apologize if I sound a little congested or if you see me drinking a lot of water. I'm sure a lot of you are right there with me. So I do apologize if I'm pausing and taking breaks for water at certain points. So as I mentioned before, my name is Laura. I've worked with children for the past over 10 years within the public school system, initially as a speech language pathologist, as a therapist, and then moving into a supervisory capacity as an instructional specialist for autism, primarily working in middle and high schools. And I spent most of my career in the DC area, the metropolitan DC area. Though currently I'm now living in Philadelphia, and I'm the Associate Director of Disability Resources and Neurodiversity Initiatives at Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have actually just changed our name, so my new title is Associate Director of the Center for Accessibility and Learning Services. I'm a certified relationship development intervention educator, or RDI educator. I've co-authored 2 workbooks with PEPSA Publishing, including the Trauma-Informed Social Emotional Toolbox, as well as the Parenting Toolbox. I'm a 2022 ASHA Convention Topic Committee member in the area of speech-language pathology business practices. I'm a member of the Maryland Speech Language Hearing Association Multicultural Affairs Committee, as well as a member of Pennsylvania Speech Language Hearing Association. A fun fact about me, I have been a unified coaching partner with Special Olympics for both bocce and track and field. Special Olympics is a wonderful organization. I really encourage you guys to check it out if you can. They do some really wonderful things. And as I mentioned, I am now living in Philadelphia. I'm working in higher education, and my primary role is to develop programs and supports at the college level for neurodivergent students. It's wonderful. It's a really, really great place to be. So for my financial disclosures, and non-financial disclosures. I receive royalties from PEPSA Publishing and Media as an author and presenter for the books that I had mentioned before, as well as a presenter and moderator for their Autism Symposium and for their second annual Kids Summit. And as I mentioned, I'm a member of ASHA, MASHA, and PASHA, and I'm receiving payment for this presentation from FAU Card. So for today's objectives, we're going to differentiate between co-regulation and self-regulation strategies. We're going to implement strategies to increase emotional language and self-awareness in neurodivergent individuals. And we're going to consider critical elements to support functional problem solving in neurodivergent individuals. So thank you for being here today, and I'm excited to be working with you. So let's start with this idea of neurodiversity advocacy, because language has been changing quite a bit over the years, and even honestly over the past few months with the use of language in describing autism. So let's just talk about it for a little bit. For our language, we have person first versus identity first language. We have person with autism versus person on the spectrum versus autistic. Now, person first language usually puts the idea of person with. So it adds on the disability as kind of a side piece outside of the whole person. So that's where you come with person with autism, person on the spectrum. That's using person first language. I was trained in person first language. A lot of therapists have been trained that way. And that is how we've historically referenced individuals with disabilities. It really started actually with the intellectual disability movement and describing someone as beyond just their cognitive capacity. They're a person with Down syndrome, but that doesn't define who they are. Now, identity first language is looking more at using the term autistic, as autism is a fundamental part of who the person is. It's part of their identity and you can't separate them from it. So instead of saying a person with autism, it's preferred to say that someone is autistic, you know, that I'm an autistic individual versus I am a person with autism. So that is kind of, it's a little bit different from person first. As I said, it's not like a piece of that person. It's really part of who they are. And so there's a lot of individuals now that are identifying as preferring the term autistic over person with autism or even person on the spectrum. And to read more about information like this, I encourage you to take a look at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, or ASAN. I have the link here. There's a lot of other resources that you can check out. I'm in the phase of kind of transitioning my language into using the term autistic. I know that there's preference from different communities in different ways. So I do use the term autistic quite frequently. There's also terms such as neurodiverse or neurodivergent that are emerging. Neurodivergent reflects learning differences overall, including autism, also including ADHD, as well as dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, and other neurological differences. So you'll hear the term neurodivergent used a lot as well. And the concept neurodiversity is actually reflecting everyone's brains being different overall. So everyone contributes to neurodiversity, whereas a neurodivergent individual actually has a diagnosed learning difference. They've done studies on language preferences now, and so you can actually look those up. They're in my references later on. And I think the important, bottom line that I have down here is that you have the discussion with, your family, your child, if you're a therapist, with individuals that you're working with, if you're a teacher, with the children that you're teaching, and just find out what their preference is. So is it do you want to be called autistic? Do you want to be called a person with autism? Let them make that choice, because ultimately you're talking about their diagnosis. So you're definitely seeing a lot more moving towards that trend of saying autistic, but there's still a lot of back and forth. And so sometimes you'll see me using both terms. I try to use kind of both equally to represent some of the different feelings going on in the world today. But as I said, it's always changing. So make sure that you're asking the individuals that you're working with what their preference is. As far as symbols go, there has been some movement recently in moving towards the infinity symbol, kind of a multicolored infinity symbol to represent neurodiversity as a reflection of all of the different types of brains that people have that are neurodivergent and that contribute to neurodiversity. So if you're starting to see autism acceptance, autism awareness and acceptance, and that idea of the infinity symbol, that's where that trending is coming from. It's looking at this idea of identity first language and also encompassing the breadth of skills, experiences, strengths, and growth areas that neurodivergent individuals have. So saying it's not just like a one size fits all, but it's a spectrum. It's an infinite number of possibilities. And then you're seeing red and gold as well as multicolored coming in as we're seeing more females being diagnosed on the spectrum, more autistic females later on in life, moving away from just blue. So what I say is, everyone who is talking about autism awareness, acceptance, puzzle pieces, infinity symbols, blue, gold, red, rainbows. You're coming from a place of wanting to do well for the autistic community. So I think it's important to listen to the neurodivergent individuals around you, the autistic individuals, people on the spectrum around you, and hear what they have to say and kind of model it after them as what they are suggesting. So I encourage you, again, look at the study. But it's a really interesting time to be working in autism right now. And so I think it's important to kind of have that discussion. And I want to take a look at this video here, which kind of frames my thinking about neurodiversity and working towards students being an agent of their own decisions, of really having autonomy, making decisions about how they're managing and regulating in environments, and how we can facilitate them understanding what their needs are and not, instead of making decisions for them about their needs. So we're really in the framework of trying to help them to empower themselves to be independent versus us deciding, like, I think these are the best strategies for you to use, but how are different ways that we can actually empower children? So we are going to take a moment to look at this. And I'm going to stop share for 1 second just to make sure I shared sound. I did. Okay, perfect. Okay.
Neurological differences like autism or ADHD are considered to be dysfunctional disorders and disabilities under the medical model of mental health. There's too little attention given to enabling people with neurologically different minds to be accepted for themselves, to discover and celebrate their strengths, and to find a place in society that values their differences. When most of us think of diversity, we think of things like race or sexual orientation, but there's a different kind of diversity you might not know about: neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the concept that neurological differences among people should be recognized and respected. I believe it's time for this new social movement, the neurodiversity movement, to take off. Neurodiversity is a part of our genetics and of our evolution as a species. The genes for autism and ADHD are not errors, but rather are the result of variations in the human genome that have and will continue to have advantages for society. One of the genes associated with ADHD The DRD4 gene is known as the novelty-seeking gene. It arrived on the human evolutionary scene over 10,000 years ago. Genes associated with autism also go back more than 10,000 years. Research suggests that genetic variants linked to autism might have been positively selected during human evolution because they contributed to exceptional memory skills, heightened perception in vision, taste, and smell, a precise eye for detail, and an enhanced understanding of systems such as animal behavior. These characteristics likely remain in the gene pool today because they are still advantageous. As a psychologist advising the parents of differently wired kids, I tell parents they have a choice between trying to change the child to fit the environment and changing the environment to fit the child. There are many different microhabitats and subcultures in our world. For an individual with autism or ADHD, finding success on their own terms may come from discovering the particular niche that fits best, the niche that allows their strengths to shine and their challenges to be minimized. Individuals with ADHD tend to thrive in situations of rapid change, variety, and that reward creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. A career as a comedian, detective, entrepreneur, journalist, actor, EMT technician, or photographer could be. I'm not saying that having autism or ADHD is easy. And I don't mean to downplay the real suffering that can be caused by having a neurodevelopmental condition, disability, or difference. But it's also time the world sees the beauty and value in brain differences. Neurodiversity might be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. My vision is for a neurodiversity tolerant and accepting society where differences are celebrated for the depth and dimension they bring to the human condition. I want children whose brains are wired differently to be encouraged to find their niche instead of changing to fit other people's ideas of normal. Diversity in every sense makes our world a better place, and people who think differently are a huge part of that.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that video as well. So let's take a look at when we're focusing on how are we supporting our kiddos with their emotional regulation, with their coping strategies with those big emotions, right, and those meltdowns and behaviors that we're seeing. So let's look at some of the frequently targeted skills. Emotional regulation, we're looking at executive functioning strategies, perspective taking strategies, pragmatic language and social interaction, as well as self-advocacy. So this is what we want to kind of help with to support that overall idea of coping, right? So executive functioning here is making a plan to initiate and then use that coping skill and that problem solving piece of how do I feel in this setting, and then what am I going to do? And what I think we really have to start with, and what I want to focus on here, are these concepts of referencing, joint attention, theory of mind, co-regulation, and self-regulation strategies. Before we even get into this idea of emotional regulation, how am I referencing and building that social construct with my child so that they feel safe and supported in the environment? So for anyone that has neurotypical children, you know that when during development, they start to kind of look at their parents to reference, or look towards a trusted adult or a caregiver to reference them. So it could be maybe they're trying to stand for the first time, they're a little wobbly, they may look over, look towards you, and if you're smiling, they're going to keep going. But if you're making kind of a face or going, you know, children tend to stop. They recognize that reference in your face as being a cue to say, oh no, I shouldn't do that. You know, we've all seen the child that falls down. It's not a bad fall, but someone goes, and then they start to cry, and it's a reaction to that referencing. Now, neurodivergent children don't develop that same referencing skill during their growth. And without that, it's much harder to share in experiences with others because you're not able to kind of gauge reaction. You're not looking at faces. you're struggling to experiment and explore new environments overall. It's harder to co-participate because you're not as aware of the individuals in the environment around you. And then it's hard to seek autonomy or to seek independence. You'd rather be in a familiar setting with a familiar routine, because then you don't have to try something new. There's no one to reference to kind of say, oh yes, it's okay to do that, to move forward. So when we're looking at referencing and building that relationship, it really is critical to development of skills for emotional regulation overall, and in developing that self-awareness is learning how to socially reference someone. So some strategies that I've used for social referencing are things like walking down a hallway, holding hands, walking outside, holding hands. And what you do is maybe you're walking at a little bit of a slower pace and you'll see a child kind of maybe moving ahead. Maybe they want to get somewhere a little bit more quickly. And instead of saying, stop, 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 or slow down, just let them pull and let them pull your arm ahead. What happens is if you stop and you're not going anywhere and they keep pulling, they're going to turn around to look at you, to kind of reference what's happening. That's when you give a smile, say, oh, you're walking really quickly today. I'm feeling like walking a little bit slower. I'm a little bit more tired. I'm going to walk more slowly. And then you can kind of keep going, or reverse it, walk more quickly and then allow, stop and see what happens when the child kind of moves past you, and do the social referencing that way. So that's like one strategy in starting to build that referencing skill. And what you're doing is you're establishing beyond a transactional interaction, beyond a demand of, I want to walk with you. You're not saying we're going to walk together. You're just walking and you're having this experience of looking back and forth. I've done it with children where I throw a ball back and forth with them. I might throw it past them to see if they're, kind of paying attention, going and getting it. And then they have to, maybe turn. What if they hold on to the ball? I might clap my hands or do something to gain attention and give a wave like, oh, I'm really interested in having that too. Smile, wave, but I don't necessarily say like throw the ball to me, because I'm focused more on the looking and the interaction there, to build up that underpinning of a relationship, so that the child starts to be more aware of you and your role in their life beyond just someone who is, getting them food or putting them to sleep or helping take care of them, but just as an individual who is present in their space and who enjoys sharing time with them. We'll talk a little bit more about that more specifically in a few minutes. So for joint attention, allows for the development of language abilities. Okay, so joint attention is kind of a precursor for that language, and we're looking at social referencing as well to support joint attention. Sharing in an experience by being able to sustain attention on a common element. Use of preferred tasks or specialized hobbies is a great way to work on joint attention. So if you have someone who's coloring, like a child who really enjoys coloring, if you are maybe trying to color with the same crayon, it becomes not about the task at that point. And that's what I think is really important when starting these foundational skills about coping and regulation. It's not about completing a task. It's about the relationship that you have when you are working together with your child. So if I have this pen here, and I'm working on drawing something or coloring something, and maybe the child tries to take it from me, I might hold on and again trigger that like social reference of looking at you when they're trying to take the pen. Oh, you want to draw too? Okay, it looks like you're excited to draw. I'm so happy that we're drawing together today. And you let them have the pen, because it's not about finishing the drawing. per se. It's not even about the drawing at all. It's about doing an activity that the child may be really interested in, but doing it together in a way that's not overly demanding. I'm not demanding a lot of tasks from them. I'm not trying to get them to color in the lines. I'm not trying to have them understand the different colors. None of it is about the task itself. It's about the experience in working with another individual and how that feels, to just be with someone else and not have an expectation of a demand or something that's going on. It's just about being together. And that those, for both social referencing and joint attention, those are really, really powerful tools to help move into that sense of regulation overall. So theory of mind, we hear about perspective taking and theory of mind all the time, but what is it? So it's the ability to actually take into consideration what another individual is thinking, understanding that people have their own thoughts and ideas that may be different from mine. Like, hey, I love the color teal. See, I have my teal scarf back here. But other people, their favorite color may be red, and that's totally fine. Differences of opinions doesn't change, the relationship that we can have with an individual. It just means that someone else has a different perspective, and that helps us in our communication and trying to convince someone of something, trying to write persuasively. Like, all of those pieces come into play when we're looking at theory of mind. It's really critical to have models of theory of mind, of if it's not something that's coming naturally to me, that I don't necessarily just inherently know that other people have different thoughts than I do. We want to model our thinking out loud and show like what something might make me feel in a situation. So when you put the dishes away, so say that you were working together on something, and we were just talking about not being like task oriented, right? So you're maybe drying dishes together and you're saying things like, wow, when we do this together, this makes me so very happy. I really enjoy doing this. So you're describing the emotion that comes along with the activity and how it makes you feel separate from how it makes, the child feel. And it's not about asking, well, how do you feel about it? Maybe they don't love it, but that again is putting that demand on the interaction. We don't want that. It's just about, I'm modeling in this situation how I'm feeling about doing something, or I'm really frustrated that your homework didn't get finished, or I'm angry that I stepped on a toy in the middle of the floor. So all of those are opportunities to just model theory of mind. And we are kind of mindful about doing things like this because it provides a model of language. And it doesn't matter if you're using verbal language or if you want to use pictures to kind of support and supplement what you're saying. The idea is that you're simply modeling your own. It's not about asking questions about their theory of mind or anything at this stage. This is really just about the model itself and building that idea of a relationship. So with the social referencing, we're being present, we're smiling. So we're improving that kind of emotional awareness just from our facial expression, use of proximity and proxemics. And then with our joint attention, kind of sharing a task that, throwing the ball when walking can be a joint attention task if you're both engaged with using that ball or toy or other thing that you're working with when walking. And then the theory of mind is simply the modeling of your own feelings in a given situation without the expectation of something else going on with the child. You're setting up the foundation of a relationship that's beyond just a task, beyond getting something done. It's just, I'm really enjoying our time together watching movies. This is so fun. I loved playing the Pokemon card game with you. Watching Sonic the Hedgehog made me laugh so hard. It was really funny. Then you're teaching emotional skills without it being something that is task driven. It's just existing within your natural environment. So for co-regulation, the idea of co-regulation is you're modulating your action in regards to the actions of another through referencing and awareness of those around you. So I think about if you're carrying a sofa, okay? If you have to, if you've ever helped a friend move or you're carrying something heavy, you kind of have to adjust in those situations to make sure that we don't drop it or that, you know, the weight's being distributed evenly. If you're not aware of another person, it makes it really hard to co-regulate with someone, because you have to develop an awareness of yourself in this space and then your awareness of working with another individual. And it's really only possible once you've established a level of trust. Excuse me. So when we think about co-regulation and kind of working with a child, think about the, you know, the day-to-day things that you're doing, making a bed, for example. You're able to co-regulate by supporting someone in maybe putting the fitted sheet on a bed, or supporting someone with putting the pillows in the pillowcases. Those are all really like functional tasks where you're doing something together, and you have to have a sense of awareness of what is happening with this other individual, what's happening with this other person, so that I can be aware of my actions. And the focus, and this is the hard part, the focus is not on the task itself. It's not about getting the pillow in the pillowcase perfectly. It's about understanding when I hold up the pillowcase that my child is going to pick up the pillow and help put it into the pillowcase. And we can do that by smiling, by holding open the pillowcase, maybe by modeling it with another person first, by talking about what the expectations are within the activity. Well, I'm going to hold the pillowcase and you can help me by putting the pillow in. And we're not focused about it being perfect, because that's not the point. It's about the regulation activity that you're doing together. Walking, it's also a co-regulation activity. You can move up, you can move faster, you can move slower. The idea is that you're learning how to modulate with each other to walk together. So initially, when we talked about walking as social referencing, it's when, you know, a child might be pulling forward. But for co-regulation, that is when I'm talking about things like, oh, gosh, you're walking really quickly today. It'd be nice if you walked with me, and maybe kind of holding them a little bit closer, showing what it's like to walk together as a pair. And it's all of these activities, they're very much grounded in this idea of regulating together so that you're building those referencing skills that are absent in neurodivergent development that we see with neurotypical children. They inherently are able to do these things. And it's harder for individuals who are neurodivergent, autistic individuals. It requires more teaching, but it's extremely rewarding because you're building a relationship and you're not talking about like doing this task or getting this done or changing this behavior. It's much more about existing together and building that foundation of trust, so that when you're working on some of those regulation skills, like, you know, how does my child choose to regulate when their, you know, anxiety is spiking up, you can have those interactions and work on those things together because you've established this kind of relationship. So self-regulation is about organizing your emotional and physiological responses, right? Without intervention from another individuals. We self-regulate all the time. It could be going and exercising, Some people do deep breathing, some people stretch, move around. Some people, tap. it just depends. Everyone has different self-regulation strategies. A lot of times in autism, you're hearing self-stimulatory behaviors that can be self-regulating behaviors, and they're self-regulating behaviors critically when there's self-awareness and metacognitive. So if I know that when I do this, it's because I need to kind of regulate myself. We learn self-regulation after co-regulation. Okay, you're learning the skill of self-monitoring through the support of another trusted individual. So self-monitoring becomes a guiding stage of, well, this is how, let me help you identify how you're feeling right now so that you're able to choose these self-regulation strategies. So it's about this guiding relationship that then moves you and the child towards independence. So co-regulation comes first. So some of those tasks we talked about, the walking, putting the bed together, doing, dishes together, and focusing on not the task itself, but the act of sharing in doing that task together. Filling up ice trays is another fun one. It can get kind of messy though, because kids will just pour more water in, and it's hard not to be like, oh, stop it. But really it's about like, wow, you're pouring a lot of water today. I see it getting all over the floor. What are we gonna do about that? And maybe pulling the tray away to signify that we're all done. But those tasks are all about doing something together, so that you're co-regulating, because you can't do the task yourself. You actually need somebody else there to do it with you. Also really fun with cooking, with doing pancakes. I've had students like make these huge, huge pancakes because they just wanted to keep ladling. And it's like, oh, wow, you're really making this large pancake today. And they kind of look at me and they smile. And it's about that trust and that rapport, so that we can then work on those next steps and say, okay, well, we've worked on this together, and now let's look at, how are you feeling when you're doing this? You're really excited. I see you're smiling. And it's that base level of trust where we get into more of the self-regulation and the self-monitoring pieces. So declarative language is something that is incredibly important to use to try to promote this idea of independence and to move away from just everything being about a transaction or about a task. So for imperative language, we have things like prompts or questions or directives. They're things that you say, like, sit here, do this, go get that, put this away. Questions, how was school today? What did you do today? All of those things require a response. So they actually have the unfortunate consequence of sometimes causing a lot of anxiety, because our autistic children struggle with comprehension and expression of language. So when we put a lot of language demands on them, it can be anxiety inducing, because now we're in the situation where I'm being asked a question. Now I have to try and formulate a response. I'm being told what to do. So now I have to go and actually do something. So the relationship then becomes about this transaction, this question response, this directive of getting something done. And that's not what we want our relationships to be. It's not about the thing that's getting done. It's about the enjoyment of actually doing something together. So how do we kind of change our mindset about away from, do this, do that, asking questions, because we want to have an interaction, but doing it in a way that's more meaningful. So, and more honoring of and affirming of the child's needs. So for declarative language, we can comment, we can describe, you can introduce I wonder statements. So commenting, I've given a few examples throughout, you might remember them, about like just saying, I'm really enjoying being here with you today. I'm enjoying doing this activity. I like coloring. It makes me very happy. The idea of, wow, you poured all that water, you poured extra onto the floor. That's commenting on a situation. It's not saying, stop it, we need to, go get the paper towels, clean up the floor. That's all imperative and directives. So with declaratives, I might say for a toy, like, I wonder why that toy is still sitting out on the floor, versus go and get that toy and put it away. Because while the imperative will get the task done, you've kind of set this foundation of that language is this transactional piece with my child. And I'm telling them that this is what they have to do. Whereas the I wonder statement is more about giving the child agency and saying, in this problem solving loop of saying, like, oh, there is a toy on the floor, I wonder what I could do with it. And then you can prompt by taking out the place where it goes, like the little box. If it goes in the box, you can smile and model actually putting the toy away. Well, I'm going to put it away today. I wonder who will put it away tomorrow. So you're describing or commenting about what's going on, reducing the demands and allowing the actual interaction to be at the forefront without it being about getting something specific done or about rewarding a specific behavior. And here it's also okay to have silence. Sometimes if you're waiting, I call it expectant delays, expectant wait times. You can be comfortable with that. We can use silence as time for processing of information where, the child is making a decision about what am I going to do next. And they may be kind of going, well, what is it that I'm supposed to do? I don't know, because I'm not being told. I'm not being given, a direct instruction. So now I have to make that choice. And so it's a process, and it's part of these declarative language pieces that build up our social referencing, support joint attention, and that theory of mind in creating these powerful co-regulating relationships, because then you're doing things together. You start doing things together and it being about being together versus about getting something complete or getting something done, which just enriches your overall relationship and sets an excellent foundation for trust to move towards self-regulation skills. Now, when we look at setting safety and we look at best practices with autism intervention, or trying to support or explain concepts to autistic children, using visuals is really, really helpful. So, these are little thought bubbles about I'm not safe, I'm not sure about this, I'm safe and sound. So if you're working on concepts of safety and setting a safe mindset baseline, these visuals can help support that. What does safety look like? Let's draw it, let's write it, let's find pictures of it. What does it feel like? And so you can have these spaces within your environment. And again, the idea is to set up for self-regulation. So for your child, what does it look like to be safe, and where do they find that? And can they then advocate for it? So what does safety sound like? So this is coming from that co-regulation. Now you've established that relationship, and then moving into self-regulation and using the visual mapping to help support making those decisions. So for social emotional skills inventories, you can fill this out yourself. You can have a child fill it out, just depending on their ability level, if they're able to do something like this. And then using icons for self-regulation strategies to say, this is an anchor, this is something that I like to do that helps relax me. And then we can take the verbal part out of it and really focus on just the visual. And so that visual means it's an anchor, and that's something that they can do. And so if you see, an increase in dysregulation, you can reference an anchor piece or whatever icon that you choose to use with your child, and they can identify a similarly identified tool, with an anchor on it or something like that. Okay. So safety and trust pyramid, this is another type of visual you can use to set a safe baseline of locations where I don't feel safe, or situations if your child is older and is starting to move more towards independence. What are some of the tools or the what are some of the places where maybe they don't feel safe? And that's important to know as they're getting ready to be more independent or interdependent or move out of the home. Building trust, okay? Trust is important to have within a relationship. Again, if you have a child that's older, they can kind of talk about what is it that makes someone else trustworthy? You know, what are the skills or the tools that makes another individual trustworthy, and enumerate them. And then again, you're supporting the child to make their own decisions about who they want to interact with that within the framework that you're helping them build. So they're making the decisions, they're being independent, so you're not being their frontal lobe. Okay. So for motivation, again, we've talked about task completion. We don't want to just work on completing a task. We don't want your child to always think that you want or need something from them in order to have an interaction. So thinking about the relationship involved in completing something versus actually getting the task done. Ask, fewer questions, be present, reinforce that you're enjoying the time with the child by communicating with them. You can use reward-based incentive systems, but there's other opportunities for motivation that we've been talking about, and then definitely use declarative language. When we're considering empathy, and this is to support the problem-solving pathways by building our theory of mind and perspective taking, right? So once we've kind of established, we've started to model our theory of mind, now this is the visual side of how can I help support my child in understanding their frame of their perspective versus my perspective. So for visual mapping strategies, think, what do you think the other person is thinking about? You can use thought bubbles. What can you say to show empathy to another individual? How does the other person feel in the situation? How do you feel in the situation? Are they the same? Are they different? And what actions can you do to actually show empathy? What are some things that you can make a decision on to do? And that's the visual mapping strategy. So visuals make abstract concepts more concrete so that in a given situation, you do the work beforehand so that they can reference something like this and make decisions about how my choices can impact other people, or how, what can I say or do to show consideration for other people as well. So with problem solving, we want to reinforce the typical problem solving pathway, recognizing and identifying the problem, considering solutions, making a plan, and then acting. We want to consider the importance of clarifying causal relationships, so cause and effect, and explicit discussion of emotions connected with problem solving overall. So when we think all the way back to the beginning, when we talked about our looking at social referencing, joint attention, theory of mind, co-regulation, all of those pieces, the buildup of the relationship gets us to this idea of problem-solving pathways of I'm going to consider and consider the perspective-taking task of what my feelings are doing within me to self-regulate in order to be in a situation where I can make a plan and act. Because ultimately what we want to do when we're talking about coping strategies and managing big emotions is about this idea of problem solving and being in the right mindset to problem solve, and using the tools such as visuals to problem solve so that we don't have our hijacked pathway where we just fight, flight, or freeze, but we're reinforcing that typical information processing pathway. And I'm going to pause here for a moment to give you guys the code for continuing education credit for this webinar. So thank you for participating in this webinar. To obtain a certificate of completion, you must fill out the form at the certificate of completion link provided on the email for this training. Please write down this code as it will be required to receive the certificate, LS052022. Again, the code is LS052022. And one more time, LS052022. Okay. This is called a soccer table. It is an excellent tool for promoting problem solving. You start with your situation, then you go through the various options. Okay. It's important to not pass judgment on the options. That's not your role. Your role is really just to help them figure out the options. And then here's the causal effects, right? Cause and effect. What option do we choose and what consequence does it have? And then what choice do we think we're going to make? After that, we're evaluating and then revising any decisions that we want to change. So if we have this situation happen, then we do the evaluate and revise after the fact. So again, this is something that we would work on outside of an actual event where a child is really dysregulated. That's not the time to do this. It's when they're in a more reflective state of mind, when you've built up that relationship and they're kind of back to being a little bit more regulated, then you can work on a problem solving pathway like this. Important to have calm, relaxed mindset. You know, what's a time that I had a calm, relaxed mindset? It's good to kind of mark those down so that in periods of dysregulation, you can remember back, well, no, I've not always had this trouble. I do have calm, relaxed mindsets. I do have other opportunities. Creating icons and visuals that remind us what a relaxed mindset looks like versus reactive. That fight, flight, freeze, or reluctant would be the freeze element there. Visuals always help so we can take the language out of it. Okay, shifting with our problem solving pathways instead of simply being reactive. How do we move from reactive to relaxed? What is the strategy, the coping strategy I'm going to use to move from here over to here, to move from reluctant over to relaxed? And that's when we're looking at, because, you know, we've done this wonderful work with our co-regulation, we're starting to identify the strategies that a child may use for self-regulation, and really, again, child-led. So what are some of the tools or the things that help to regulate? Could be music. A lot of children like to color, or they have a favorite game that they might want to play, and maybe some of those self-stimulatory behaviors, as long as they're not harmful to themselves. So whatever strategy is effective, that's a strategy you want to go with, and to help them identify that this is what you need to do when you're starting to feel disrupted or starting to feel frustrated. And then that brings them into that problem solving pathway in terms of making decisions, right? So we continue to model that. We're checking in with calm problem solving strategies by checking in on our emotions. How frustrated are you? A scale of 1 to 5. Again, using these visuals makes these concepts much more concrete. You can use 0 to 3. You could use different images and faces to help clarify and validate feelings. Don't say you shouldn't be upset right now. It's okay to feel upset. I see you feel upset. And what are we going to do? You know, like, what are the next steps here? Now, for opportunities for new learning, these are your really functional problem solving opportunities. So they're very exciting because they happen every day. So static learning versus dynamic learning. Static learning are those routine-based tasks that are rote, very familiar, are things that we do all the time. It could be remembering a phone number, dialing a phone number, driving to a certain location for us adults, you know, driving back and forth to work, like that becomes pretty routine, pretty static. Or setting the table could be another where it's very, very static. So a dynamic learning opportunity involves like just slight problem solving strategies. So for example, I just talked about setting the table. Well, let's say you didn't set out enough knives or forks. You don't have enough knives or forks available. So what do we do in that situation? How do we problem solve that situation? And so working with the child in that sense of, again, not task-based, it's about the relationship. So they're looking, and maybe they try to set out and they're like, oh, wait, I don't have enough internally. And they're kind of looking around Now, if we've established that relationship, maybe they look at you and you go, wow, it looks like we don't have enough knives and forks. So you're validating what's happening. And then maybe you kind of put your hand on the drawer where there are knives and forks, or say something like, I wonder where I could find those. I wonder where they could be. And so you're talking through the problem solving, you're modeling the problem solving, but you're not giving a directive or telling them what to do because you want them to figure it out for themselves. And then if you start seeing a more reluctant or reactive mindset, it becomes, oh, well, I wonder if we should take a second and color, or take a second and do that kind of regulation activity to bring us back to that goal of a problem solving mindset. Okay. So when we're confronted with new learning, a child will always reference a trusted adult. So that's where the importance of that relationship comes in. And expectant delay is a really, really powerful tool here. Using visuals, taking abstract concepts and making them concrete. Okay, critical for the development of social emotional vocabulary as well. So here are some ways that I've used to build emotional vocabulary skills. So for outraged, for synonyms, we can have different pictures here associated with different words, and it helps build overall emotional vocabulary. I love using paint chips because they have color element to them. You can have the child pick what color they want to use for different emotions. You may want to use green for happy, but maybe they feel like green is more bored. And that's what I think it is. Yeah, it's bored on this one with the Elmo check-in. So you could do these as check-ins in your household, in a classroom, but paint chips are really great tools for emotional vocabulary. Coping cards. So we're using a visual to help build that social emotional awareness when my body feels tense, tight, when my thoughts are running. I had one student tell me it was like a stampeding T-Rex. It was very descriptive. I'm going to do this. And this is where we're putting in our coping strategy. So whatever it is that the child needs to do, and we're creating this visual so that they can reference it and come back to it consistently. And that makes them agents of their own decisions. Emotional vocabulary, again, using different icons to reflect terms. So here, the cloud icon was more the positive, relaxed terms. And then the rectangle icon was, uneasy, scattered, terms that were maybe indicating that we're increasing in our dysregulation. Okay. So we can use visuals for a range of regulation, having a bar where a child moves the face on it to being like they're zoned out. And it's important to do like consistent check-ins on stuff like this to build their own social emotional capacity so that they start to understand that language level, and that you're modeling. It's not about getting this done. It's about, hey, I see that you may be kind of tired right now. You're lying down on the couch. So I'm going to move this range of regulation over here. You don't necessarily need them to do it. It's modeling and kind of showing that validation of their feelings as well. Okay. We can work on vulnerability and perspective taking. So what are the things that I'm really good at? This is interesting to kind of get a perspective of what your child thinks that they're great at, what their skills are, and then what they want to work on and where they really struggle, and then have a friend or a sibling kind of rate as well. And then it's interesting to see what can we learn from our friends, from our siblings. It's a great perspective taking task. So for our empowerment and our decision making, we want to build those choices into daily practice, and we want to validate experiences. So empowerment is about the ability to make choices, right? So even those functional daily tasks I talked about, we don't have to have, we're going to do this or we're going to do this. That's what everyone thinks when we have making choice. But for the dynamic learning opportunities, the child's making a choice of how they want to respond. Again, like if you're not making a demand or asking a question, the child's making a choice on how they want to interact with you. So incorporating your declarative language opportunities within your day-to-day, it builds choices into daily practice. Okay, reflective practices. We're using checklists, rubrics. How are we doing to help the child understand their self-regulation strategies so that they're then empowered to make those decisions independently? Okay. Now, communication with families. For those of you that are working with therapy groups or other organizations, carryover is critical. So I encourage you to really, really work with the therapists that are working with your child and find out what the goals are. Talk about some of the strategies that you're using to build coping strategies and ways you're building coping strategies. Talk about declarative language and how you're trying to introduce those functional problem solving opportunities and have those discussions, because that's really critical. For our readiness signs, I want to encourage you that if a child is in a dysregulated state, it's not a time to really be working on regulation, to work on doing like a task. It's a time to just be with the child. So check in with yourself on how is the child ready to have these kinds of discussions. So thank you so much for sharing some time with me today to talk about the roadmap to regulation and looking at coping with big emotions, using, really focusing in on those co-regulation strategies, working on social referencing, moving away from task-dependent strategies, and building that relationship so that you can work on the problem-solving mindset. I really appreciated your guys' attention today. You can connect with me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Twitter. And these are my references for today. If you're interested in more information on declarative language, I really encourage you to check out Linda Murphy's book. My own books are also included in here as well. And thank you so much for attending. You can contact Florida Atlantic University's CARD office at 561-297-2055. Email is card@fau.edu, or their website is www.autism.fau.edu. So thank you all for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.